and you find that data is proxed, it is not correct, and we need to do more on that. The other one is on financing of SDGs, then standardize the monitoring of the implementation of SDGs. I think that's all. Thank you very much for listening to me, please. I've taken long. Thank you.
A big round of applause for Dr. Byamagisha, who is the head of the National SDG Secretariat. Thank you for so much. I won't need to do anything more about that elaborate presentation. It was very, very clear. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we do continue to delve deeper into more discussions, allow me to recognize some of the dignitaries we already have present in our midst. We all know we will be expecting our Prime Minister, Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, who will be joining us at a later stage. But we do have the Right Honorable Justine Kasule Lumumba, Minister General Duties, but also the Focal Minister for SDGs. You could wave to us, Madam. Thank you so much for sparing your time to join us. I know busy schedule it is, but thank you so much. We have Honorable Alice Kavoyo, the Minister of State for Luweero Rwenzori Triangle. Thank you so much, Madam, for sparing your time to be with us. We do have the Head of the Public Service, Ms. Lucy Nachorebe, please. Thank you so, so much for joining us. And earlier on, a gentleman who also spoke to us, the Permanent Secretary, Office of the Prime Minister, Mr. Keith Muhakanizi, please. Thank you so much off your busy schedule for sparing time to be with us. But also from the UN family, we do have the UN Resident Coordinator, Mrs. Ngongi Namondo. Thank you so much off your busy schedule. A round of applause for her. Still from the UN family, we have the UNDP Resident Rep, Ms. Elsie Atafua. Always a pleasure, Madam. Thank you so much for always coming through. We have the UNICEF Rep, Dr. Munir Safeldin. Please, thank you so much. A pleasure having you. I also do have the UN Women Resident Rep and Head of Office, Ms. Adikeme Ndieli. Thank you so much for coming through. Also from the government side, I just realized that we had the entry of Honorable Moroli Mukasa, the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Honorable Moroli Mukasa, wherever you are, oh yes, thank you so much. The masks sometimes get to hide us away, but thank you so much for sparing time to be with us right here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I did clearly say, we've now seen where we are at with regard to our Sustainable Development Goals, and one particular thing that Doctor spoke about is goal number 17, particularly, which is partnerships for us to be able to achieve these goals and speed up. Now, to take this a little bit a notch higher, we realize that all these goals that we are looking at require financing. And when it comes to financing, there can never be a point where we say we have enough to be able to fulfill everything that we desire, because there are competing priorities at different times. But like I said, the SDGs are about humanity. So how do we get to balance up the competing realities and competing priorities that we do have as a country, but also be able to focus on the commitments that we have made as a country? Now, to take up that particular session, which will focus on the priorities and financing the Sustainable Development Goals to accelerate the 2030 agenda. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ms. Elsie Atafua, who is also the Resident Rep UNDP. Let's give her a round of applause. And I will officially hand over power right now.
Good morning, everyone. I crave your indulgence to remove my mask. I tested negative, and I don't do well speaking in mask when I speak for long. So let me first of all recognize the Right Honorable Prime Minister, who is yet to come here, but also the Minister of General Duties, Focal Point, Minister for SDGs, Right Honorable Justine Kasule Lumumba. I also wanted to recognize Honorable Moroli Mukasa, Honorable Alice Kaboyo, the Head of Public Service, the PS of OPM, the UN Resident Coordinator, our own Head of UN Family, my fellow colleague representatives, ambassadors, excellencies, senior government officials, colleagues from the UN, private sector, academia, civil society, youth. I saw some beautiful children entering this morning, media fraternity. Let me simply say, distinguished participants, all protocols observed. A very warm welcome to what promises to be a very exciting conversation, and the conversation is around priorities and financing the SDGs to accelerate the 2030 agenda. I'll be your moderator for the session. I want to thank the government of Uganda for allowing me to moderate the session, but also by extension, the United Nations family. Now, what we're going to do today is to hear a bit about what does it mean to prioritize? What are we prioritizing? And what is that finance that we are talking about? And to have that conversation as a group of panelists, very distinguished panelists that I'm going to introduce. But before I introduce them, let me try to set some context because I think we are all not on the same page when it comes to the issue around the SDGs and financing. Now, when we talk about the SDGs, friends, excellencies, honorable ministers, we are talking about not something in the stratosphere, and I think Dr. Albert did a very good job by unpacking that. But it is translated in our Vision 2040. It is translated in our National Development Plan. It is translated in our Vision 2040. Now, when we talk about priorities, again, Uganda has a lot of competing priorities: tourism, environment, industrialization. What should we be focusing on, and why? Now, when it comes to financing, which Dr. Albert talked about, the financing agenda has been on the table for a very long time. For those of you who remember, we started in Monterrey, when there was Monterrey consensus. We came down to Doha. We came to Addis Ababa. And Addis Ababa opened a new era on the conversations around financing. And here when we are talking financing, we are not talking about only domestic financing and from government. We are also talking about international financing. We are also talking about flows. We are talking about policies. We are talking about alignment. Here again, it's not only about government, it's also about the international organizations, it's about businesses, it's about civil society, philanthropists. How do we all deliver financing? So again, don't only look at government, also looking at the plethora of actors when we talk about financing. I hope I'm not speaking too fast because I'm normally a fast speaker. Are you okay? All right. So we're going to delve into the conversations around domestic financing, private businesses, even international trade. We will talk about debt and debt sustainability, addressing systemic issues, science and technology, but also looking at real integrated approaches, holistic approaches, cross-cutting approaches to the question around priorities and financing. And this morning I was listening, as I prepared for this meeting, I was listening to our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, who recently launched the United Nations 2022 financing report. And amongst other things, she dwelled also on the crisis that is happening now, whether it's a crisis of COVID, the crisis that we see on conflicts and the impacts. And therefore, we need to begin to look at financing even in the context of managing crisis, the climate crisis, and looking at issues around even credit ratings, issues around addressing illicit financial flows, and many more. So I don't want to take the conversation away from those who would speak. But perhaps as we contextualize the conversation today and this morning on Uganda, I just want us to think about four things. First of all, Dr. Albert talks about a progress. It's good progress, and we appreciate the leadership of government on this. But how do we advance? How do we take it forward, noting we have mixed results? Number two, we have a national development plan to implement. The estimated implementation budget is huge, and we don't have everything. How are we going to do that now, especially in the context of some of the things that we are seeing? We've also seen, three, that our debt stock has been rising, whilst Uganda still has moderate, when you do the calculation, still moderate. What more can we do so that we don't build on our debt stockpile? Then finally, we also want to hear from the private sector. Recently, McKinsey had a report, and McKinsey said in the last 20 years, global savings has increased by increased a lot. 2/3 of that money rests with the private sector. But the private sector is only investing mostly in real estate and in gold. So how is it that we can get the private sector to invest in the sustainable development goals? So to kick off the conversation today, is a man whom we all know, a very distinguished person, Dr. Peter Chimbowa, the chairperson of the National Social Security Fund. We know what NSSF does, and he's here today to present to us some reflections on the financing mechanisms for SDGs and what does it take. So let's welcome Dr. Peter Chimbowa to set the scene, and thereafter the panel discussion. Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for him. The conversation has started. Thank you.
Distinguished guests present this morning, I'm going to share perspectives on financing, the financing strategies, the mechanisms, and also the options, especially for the SDGs. I stand here, as chair of NSSF, but also as a founder of the CEO Summit. I'm very happy to see in the audience Mr. Keith Makanizi, who was very close to the establishment of this CEO Summit, and also who contributed a lot in trying to find out how the private sector can support the national budget in driving the goals, the SDG goals. I also speak again as a founder of the League of East African Directors, LEAD, which is one organization that is mainstreaming SDGs in the boardroom. So those are the three hats that I'm wearing this morning. I've got very little time, but I want to start with what our experiences were during COVID. COVID, like Schwab, the head of World Economic Forum, says, COVID has opened a rare and narrow window of opportunity for us to rethink, to reflect, and reset everything that we think about humanity and the opportunities. COVID has also taught us that humility is the new smart. And humility doesn't mean that you don't know anything. You know a lot, but there's a lot you don't know. COVID has also taught us that each one of us is within learning distance. COVID has also taught us that there's no single source of truth. There are multiple sources of truth. COVID has taught us that imagination is better than knowledge. COVID has also taught us that while we are in the same storm, we are in different boats. So how did this affect us in the NSSF? Number one was people, and the way we were going to work together, and the way we were going to live together. 4 plans. As members of the board, this is what we requested of management to do. We start with the people, and then the technology, and the innovation pipeline, because we didn't know how long will COVID remain, and how much destruction is going to be. Number one, we wanted an emergency response plan. Number 2, we wanted the business continuity plan. Number 3 was the disaster recovery plan. Number 4 was the contingence plan. Those 4 plans had to be at the center of every discussion that we had in the fund. Now, moving on to the SDGs, as we know in Africa, we don't wait for the storm to pass. We have learned to dance in the rain. We knew COVID was there, but work had to continue. NSSF had to breathe in the present, but live in the future. So, number 1 was to get the full buy-in that the SDG were not going to be abandoned, we were going to continue. We moved away from considering our participation in the SDGs as corporate social responsibility. This word is dead. There is a mission to change perception and language. Corporate social responsibility is like a handshake. Corporate social investment, which is what SDG looks up to, is an embrace, not handshake. It's total and absolute commitment to the journey. It's a shift from bold statements of commitment to action. It's a shift from just describing and diagnosing the crisis to actually taking action, prescription and prediction. So that's what we moved away from, mindset. There was total buy-in. Number 2 was to integrate the SDGs, especially SDG number 3 on the health, and SDG 4, which is about education, SDG 8, which was the well-being, and 9 infrastructure and innovation, but more importantly, partnerships, working with others. We created a special department for this in the NSSF. So, and we created a budget for it. We made sure that we integrate our budget and strategy into it. Number 3, we made sure that we identify those key areas within each SDG where we would build initiatives. For every SDG, there's a set of initiatives with very specific outline on the objectives, the targets, and the resources required, the risks therein, and so on. Then we did more, was to establish a strong mechanism of accountability, which I think Dr. Albert was doing here. So we want accountability, we want to measure, are we stagnant, are we moving forward, are we in disarray? Then the other thing that we did was to infuse passion and enthusiasm in our staff, to know that purpose goes before profit, to understand the short and long-term impact of our participation in this, and then reporting regularly. As you're aware, in the COVID, we moved digital. So this is how we moved here in this case. We reshaped our investment portfolio. We keep savers' money, and we must make sure that the savers get interest and benefit from their savings. So we reshaped our portfolio in order to create broad value, especially broad value in terms of different levels of society. The next one was to make our budget and balance sheet and cost structures resilient. And number 3, it was to embed digital and analytics. The world is moving on the basis of data, use of algorithms and data. So the technology capability of the fund is one to behold, I must say. Forgetting about my modest a bit. But NSSF is one strongly empowered, tech-driven data platforms that are available in the fund to be able to take the correct decisions, to be able to follow up. The other thing that we did was to make sure that we create flexibility, safety, and performance within the operations, and develop a systems thinking approach to our SDGs in the fund. Why? Because we were in it for good. We were in it for we were preparing for a long journey forward. The other thing that we've done is to create a rich, robust pipeline of innovations. Innovation within a lot of stuff we do. You're aware that at the moment, we are constructing the pension towers, which is probably the biggest building in Kampala. It's going to be for some time. And the issue here is it a smart building? It is. We are totally responsive to what the United Nations, I think, call EDGE. EDGE is excellence in designing for greater efficiency. We are, in terms of financing, moving close to establishing, and this is within the fund, this is what we did, but outside, working with other actors in the SDG space, we are looking for documentation. There are very few green deals in Africa. The Global Social Investing Network recorded $404 billion US dollars, but about 59% of it went to emerging markets, and 22% was found its way in sub-Saharan Africa. So there are fewer deals, and yet the funding agencies around the world are moving into Africa to look for very bankable projects, investment ready and bankable documents, and this is still a hardship in the area of financing. In the area of financing, we still have challenges in having projects that can specifically describe the challenges and the solution, technically feasible, socially desirable, and viable, essentially. They are nowhere to be seen. Now, the fund, working with other actors outside, I know my time is up, looks at 9 factors. Number 1, for you to build and develop a bankable project, investment ready, for financials outside Africa and elsewhere, for you to attract funding for SDG, number 1, you must describe properly why are we doing this project, whether in water, whether in infrastructure. Number 2, you must describe the people who are going to be involved. Describe exactly the sponsors who are going to be responsible for accountability, how frequently they are going to account. Number two, who are going to benefit, the stakeholders, who are going to benefit from this project, who are going to be affected by the project. We know very well that in our kind of environment, corruption, bureaucracy, witchcraft, superstition, culture, all these things matter. And yet we need community participation. The other point was, what kind of skills do we need to take this project off? What other resources do we need? The next point is about deliverables. What are we trying to build? What are we trying to produce? What are we trying to deliver? The next point is, where is the plan? Supposing a crisis occurs and multiple emergencies, what will we do? The next point is more about when, how, and where do we start? Most important of all, number 8, is the cost of the project. The cost of the project. And finally, what the impact, the benefits, and all those things will be. And that should be a bankable, investment-ready project for any funding agency, funding green projects and SDGs. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
A round of applause. We need to feel the energy here. A round of applause. Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, I want to bring the conversation back again to the table. The conversation this morning is about priorities and financing in a way that we can accelerate the SDGs. Earlier on, I said a bit of context by what we mean by financing, what we mean by priorities, and which areas that we're going to be looking at. And it's been very interesting to have Dr. Peter Chimboa. It's very profound and deep reflections. I think I take a couple of points from him. The fact that, we have to be able to reimagine the way we do business during crisis. He said imagination is better than knowledge. He also talked about the fact that we need data to inform decision-making, issues around accountability, how we integrate the SDGs. But I think one of the things that struck me, Dr. Chimboa, that you said, corporate social responsibility is dead. The good old days when you just have some football being played by young people and say, okay, we are doing something as private sector is dead. But how do we look at your own business operations from the beginning to the end, and what more can we do? But also interesting looking at innovative sources of financing, green deals, green bonds, and many other areas that we could be looking into. And so to take the conversation forward is a group of very renowned Ugandans who have been contributing in different ways to this country's development agenda, but also looking at it from the financing point of view, from the priorities point of view. And to set us going, let me welcome this morning to speak to us as part of the panelists. Let's welcome Mr. Stephen Asimwe, CEO of the Private Sector Foundation, who is coming as a panelist and will be speaking later on to us on the role of the private sector. Please, a round of applause to Mr. Stephen Asimwe. I would also want to welcome Dr. Marius Obona, who is representing the board of the National Planning Authority. And please, let's welcome with a round of applause, Dr. Marius Obona. I also wanted to welcome the representative of the Ministry of Finance. If the representative of the Ministry of Finance is here, could you join us, representing Mr. Ramadan Ngobi? All right, I'm sure the person is about to come. And then we also want to welcome Honorable Jovrin Kalisa, the Deputy National Coordinator, the Parish Development Secretariat, who is also joining as a panelist. Is she here? You're representing? All right. We seem to have an all-men's panel, save for me, but let's get going. So I'm going to be seated next to the panelists very soon, but let me perhaps kick off the first conversation. I hope, Dr. Marius, you've caught your breath a bit to start the conversation, because We know that the National Planning Authority plays a very critical role in designing and implementing integrated development planning, but also financing frameworks. And really, the NDP3 is premised on the fact that we should be able to find the needed priorities to accelerate the SDGs, but also importantly, the financing to implement it. So let's start off with you, NPA. And I think what I would like to hear from you, and all of us would want to hear from you, is the reality of development planning and financing, particularly in the context of COVID. And I think Dr. Chimbowa talked a bit about that. What has changed? What should change, especially when we are dealing with multiple crises? We also know that when you costed the NDP3, things have changed. So what should we be doing differently? Over to you, Dr. Mario. So you have, I think all the panelists, if you can situate your conversations around, let's say 4 minutes, because I want to do a second round with you, and I want to go back to our distinguished audience this morning to really hear from them as well, their perspectives around the issues around prioritization and financing. So let's start with NPA.
Thank you, Moderator, and protocols observed. First, let me start by saying that from the presentation which came first, gave us the assurance that the NDP3 is 95%, aligned to SDGs. So basically, when I'm going to talk about the NDP3, I'm actually talking about SDGs. As you are aware, the SDGs has 3 development components: the economic, social, and the environment. And all these aspects are also taken care of in the NDP3. Now, let me first start by saying also that when the COVID-19 struck, the NDP3 was already on the runway, ready to take off. That is in 2020. And I want to assure the audience that, fortunately, COVID did not affect the takeoff of the NDP3. In a sense, the runway was actually intact. Now, when COVID came, what it simply did was that there are certain things that we have to rethink again. But the fact is, the NDP3 remains intact and relevant in all its components, because the priorities, the interventions that were arrived at were based on data, based on evidence that were empirical work done by the team that came up with. So the issue I'm raising here is, with or without COVID, the priorities in NDP would still remain the same. What may differ will be the reordering or rescheduling of the actions or interventions that are required to respond to the impact of COVID-19. Now, and I must also say that when you're writing a plan, you also take care of the possible risks and shocks that may come in. So we could regard the COVID-19 as one of the shocks that came in, and it was, of course, not surprising to the planners as well. Now, having said that, I would like to also remind the audience that the NDP3 midterm review is going on, in the sense that every half time we have to see the performance of the plan, and that will inform us on what to do in the remaining half time of the plan, and of course for the future plan. So it will be important to have that midterm review undertaken to help us re-prioritize or re-strategize on what to do to see that the Vision 2040 is actually achieved in the time that has been planned. So what is different that we are now thinking of? Some of these will be confirmed by the report of the MTR, but I would like just to mention 2 or 3. The first is the worrying aspect of the debt service. As you have seen, we have 20 programs, but in the budget, there is what we call debt and interest service, which in fact could be regarded as a program in its own, because it commands 35% of the total budget envelope. And that is not small money, especially when you know that this money gets out of the economy and never returns. And of course, the point here is that we should take the physical space issue as an issue that should be taken care of in the planning process. And here, when we talk of the physical space of government, it is becoming narrower and narrower, especially we know, for instance, how we raise resources for implementing our plan, domestic resource, borrowing, and so on, and all these are getting narrower and narrower. But we would like to also to add here that one possible way of expanding the fiscal space is really what we call efficiency gain. When I'm talking about efficiency gain, I'm talking of the allocative efficiency, that is the allocation of resources in the different programs and so on. But most importantly, how efficiently are we using the resources? In other words, are we minimizing the wastages, leakages and so on, which in fact could be one option of increasing the physical space with the available resources that we already have. And of course, we could also look at other sources like the PPP, which are some mixed reactions on their performance, but also looking at issuing bonds to the diaspora community. In other words, trying to leverage the resources of the diaspora to help us out on that. That is on financing. But basically, what we could also look at is that we need to refocus our attention to build resilience of the economy. Because COVID showed us that, look, if the economy is not resilient enough, then you will have a very serious implications. But at least for Uganda, there are certain aspects that are sectors which were not really terribly affected and so on. So the issue now that we look at is the resilience building of the economy to try to reduce on the import dependence. Because if you are more self-reliant, then this issue of Ukraine, Russia, and so on, the supply shortages and so on will not come in. So that most of these programs are also taken care of in the plan. So the point here is that we are going to overemphasize or put more resources in some of those programs.
Marius,
that
you have
will help us
30 seconds, because I think we need to hear from the others as well. But let me catch you there, because you have been giving some perspectives around, yes, we need to do debt servicing, yes, we need to be efficient, yet we need to be resilient. I mean, can you zero down? I mean, I don't think we have to wait for the MTR to get some more factual things from you. What more can we do? I just want you to move away from the generalities a bit to some specifics on what we're talking about.
Thank you. Now, to be more on the specificities, COVID actually gave us opportunities. Like the Chinese say, whenever there's a crisis, there's also the opportunity part of it. One of it is digitizing most of the activities like e-commerce, e-trade, and so on, which is a plus on the side of the COVID-30. And I think that is very important for us to look into. That is trying to reduce the cost of doing business by using the ICT and so on that has already been mentioned. So that is one possible, more direct way of doing that. But the other one, as I said, is the fast tracking of the recovery of the issues that we have been thinking of in before. So basically, what we have as specific ones can actually be obtained from the handouts that we have on the issues that I should have read on specifically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Dr. Mario Sobona. Well, the Supra MC is about to take the floor from me, so let me hand over to her. As the one anxious need to sit down now. Commercial break.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Elsie. I will allow that you sit just right next there. I almost actually asked as well that you can moderate that session seated because it's a little longer. But ladies and gentlemen, we have our Prime Minister who is just jetting in right now, and I'm kindly requesting the Right Honorable Kasule Lumumba, who is already outside, Honorable Alice Kawoyo, Honorable Miroli Mukasa, Honorable Miroli Mukasa and the PS, if you don't mind, please. I do request that you become part of the team that is receiving our Prime Minister and Dr. Albert Byamugisha as well. We will receive the Prime Minister and have the national anthems, and then much later on we will continue with this very panel before we go ahead with the other program session. But for now, let's have our ministers receive the Prime Minister. Let's Let's all stand up, ladies and gentlemen, as we welcome our Prime Minister. Welcome, Right Honorable Robina Nabanja, the Lady of Action. Earlier on, we were talking about moving from the Book of Lamentations to Actions. And someone added, Mr. Stephen Asimu added that we can as well get to the Book of Numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we get seated, I will request our team, our technical team, to have our anthems ready. We have the anthems once again, and then we can continue with the panel before we officially go back to the speeches. So to our technical team, Fenon Events, let's have the national anthem, starting with the Ugandan anthem, and then the East African anthem in that order. We can get seated, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, Right Honorable Prime Minister, Right Honorable Robina Nabanja, thank you so much for sparing your precious time to be with us. She's a lady I know who is a very committed one, a very good time manager, and she also in the Bible loves to read from the Book of Actions mainly, and not the Book of Lamentations. So ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with our panel discussion, and right after Ms. Eltia Tafwa winds up with this particular one, we'll go into our guest of honor and our other dignitaries speaking to us. So I hand back.
A very warm welcome to you, Right Honorable Prime Minister. I want to associate myself with what our sister just said, a woman of action and a woman who has inspired all of us to higher heights. Thank you very much. We all draw a lot from her energy. A round of applause to her. Right Honorable Prime Minister, if I could just give in 2 minutes a bit of summary of what we have been discussing. We just started a panel discussion focusing on priorities and financing for the Sustainable Development Goals in Uganda. We set the context by saying that the SDGs are contextualized here in the context of our 2040 vision, National Development Plan. And we also talked about the fact that when we are talking priorities, There's a lot of things that Uganda wants to do, but where should we be putting our energies? And this panel is helping us to reflect on some of these things. And the second part of the conversation, Right Honorable Prime Minister, is around financing. We also established the fact that financing is not just only from government. Financing is also from international businesses, international organizations, and philanthropists. We are looking at financial flows. We are looking at how policies are aligned. We are also looking at how we make all these things efficient. In that context, we also then had a bit of information from the chair of the board of NSSF, Dr. Chimboa, who talked about very profound things. I can't repeat everything that he said. But amongst others, he also established that in times of crisis, we need to be agile, we need to do business differently, and in many ways, NSSF has set the vision by reinventing itself and by reimagining how to do financing in this context. We have just said also from the National Planning Authority on the importance of making sure that we adapt our priorities in the context of the effects of COVID, looking at issues around digitalization, efficiency, and how do we make sure that the resources that we have, we can also make sure that we use them and rationalize them properly. So the conversation, Right Honorable Prime Minister, is on financing and priorities, and now we will continue the conversation. The second person I want to invite to join the conversation is the Chief Executive Officer of the Private Sector Foundation, Mr. Stephen Asimwe. And Mr. Asimwe, you know the role of the private sector and the contribution it can make to financing. So what I really want you to talk about this morning is to reflect with us more on how can we unlock private sector financing to support the sustainable development goals. And I really want you to be practical. What are the things we should be looking at and why? So you have about 4 minutes because I have to manage the time now. We lost 40 minutes earlier on. Keep it short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Els, and Right Honorable Prime Minister, Ministers, PSs, distinguished guests, and everyone present. Stephen Asimwe is my name. I represent the Private Sector Foundation, which is the apex body of private sector players. We have 300 business associations, and I would like to talk about this in context from the way we look at things on our side. As the private sector, we are PSFU in particular, we look at 4 strategic interventions or mandates. The first is policy and advocacy. And that's critical in terms of influencing and shaping how the private sector operates, especially in the context of an enabling environment. There's no way we can do and practice business unless we have enablers. The second one is business development services. And in that context is how do you create money? How do you create profits? How do you create jobs? How do you create opportunities, markets, etc.? The third and critical factor, and it's provided for in the SDGs that you mentioned, are skills and capacity. Money is a skill. You have to find a mechanism of managing it, saving it, deploying it, and creating a return on investment. And fourthly, what we do very well is in the context of partnerships. And so in our context, we work very closely with government. We work with the multilateral institutions, development partners, including yourself. And it's just exactly about a year now since we started the private sector SDG platform, in which we look at strategic means and ways of engaging. Now, I could have said much more on what we do, but clearly, like you said, there is so much money out there, but the challenge is how do we access it? One of the things that are clear, and I think you mentioned that there is so much money stored up, but is only being deployed in the context of real estate and housing. One thing is very clear: money fears noise. Nobody is going to deploy resources unless they are clear, they are sure, they have an insurance, they have comfort, and that money will be deployed very well and will bring a return on investment. I'll give you a quick example. We've just come back from the DRC as private sector and government, and we were led at the highest level by the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of East African Community Affairs. We're in Kinshasa and Goma. We had a fantastic meeting with our colleagues from the other side, private sector, government, etc. Hardly a few days after that, we've seen what you've been seeing in the news how a lot of our business people cannot access, the southwestern tip of Uganda because of fighting. Now, when money is being deployed and there's a sense of insecurity, it won't come. Secondly, if money is going to be deployed for specific investment or onward lending or business or trade, and the policies and enablers are not in place, it's going to have a challenge. However, for us as private sector foundations especially, we've had very, very engaging discussions with government, and some of the interventions we've had, and I'll give examples here, are, for instance, we've started something called the Young Africa Works. We have over 75% of our population, which is young, under the age of 35. And in this program, we are engaging young people with skills, especially financial skills, to enable them make meaningful business so that they can have a return on investment and then avoid unemployment. One of the other things we have seen challenges in is the element of corruption. And so one of the strategic elements we have deployed is a program called SG Plus, Skills and Governance, to ensure that people actually use meaningful strategic means to start work. The third is we are now working with the World Bank on a program called GROW, which is generating livelihoods and opportunities, especially for women. And in this area, we're looking at 67% of our businesses are largely micro, small, and medium enterprises. How do you absorb, engage, deploy resources meaningfully so that they can attract some serious return on investment? And because of that, we are beginning to attract resources in that direction, and it is beginning to pay off. The other bit, I think Mr. Chimbo mentioned the element of creativity and innovation. We noticed that during COVID-19, a lot of our businesses suffered, businesses crashed. We actually have a huge portfolio of non-performing loans. One of the things we did was deploy resources in the areas of COVID, economic resilience, resuscitation. And what did it do? It actually attracted money. We've been getting a lot of money, especially from multinational and multilateral institutions, but also private equity and capital. We're working closely with the NSSF in an area of innovation, and we're looking at deploying these resources in youth. So yes, there is money out there. It is the design, it is the planning, it is the innovation with which, if you meaningfully get that money and have it deployed well with the proper skills, structures, system, and the best staff capable, you will get a good return on investment. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Asimwe. I'm not, leaving you off the hook, because I think you talked about nice things, and there shouldn't be noise, corruption, and grow, and others. But I mean, we're talking here our Vision 2040 in a very substantive way. How do we go to scale? And you talked about, getting money from the international financial institution, but we are thinking you financing the development solutions and actions of the people of Uganda. So I want to hear something more tangible on what is it? What is the one or two things that we should nail to go to scale?
That's a very good question. I'll give you a quick example. Right now, Uganda has a population of about 46 million people. We have anywhere between 100 and 120 top manufacturers, small-scale manufacturers. We need markets. We've just been joined by the DRC, which has a population of about 100 million people. 60% of our exports to the DRC is mostly on the eastern fringe of their border, from Nebi down to Kisoro. From our analysis, the biggest challenge we've had is infrastructure. We are now talking about deploying export processing zones on our borders. The entire North and South Kivu, which is our immediate neighbor, and Equatoria province, just down south of South Sudan, effectively brings us close to $700 million in terms of export. So what do we do? One, we need infrastructure. Two, we need export financing. And right now, this morning, I was just coming from a meeting in which we are discussing export financing capabilities. We need resources for that kind of thing. Three, value addition, and I'm glad that the government has put in a lot of resources, especially in agricultural financing, to speak into that area. 4, security. For heaven's sake, we badly need security. There's no way we are going to have all our 3 roads that have been promised by the government, and we thank you for that. The road from Bunagana to Goma, from Mpondwe to Bunia, and from Gobi to Beni is about 300 kilometers. We need those roads fixed because we have a huge critical mass of business people who want to enter these markets. 4, skills, access to credit, access to affordable but necessary credit is important. And I will tell you, for instance, that the majority of people accessing finances are in circles. And I'm glad that now we are beginning to have a discussion with government on the issue of the Parish Development Model, because that's where the real people are. That's where they access the money. We need to create an enabling special purpose vehicle that speaks to that population. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, I think I pushed you a bit to be more detailed there, and I think the conversation around trade and what you need in terms of the infrastructure, export financing, value addition becomes very important. And let me just take advantage of being a moderator, right, Honorable Prime Minister, to really emphasize the importance of trade, and particularly in the African context. Africa only trades amongst itself 16.6%. We trade with everybody else, but for ourselves. And I think within the context of the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement, which His Excellency the President has signed, that's one area that we have to push, even beyond EAC and COMESA, to other parts of Africa. I mean, there is no reason why countries like mine, Ghana and others, are importing milk from other places other than Africa when Uganda has milk. So we need to tap into that market, which is 1.2 billion people. And I think that issues around credit, financing, export readiness becomes very important. In the last 1 year, the United Nations family has been pushing on that front a bit, and I thought I would use my advantage of being a moderator to talk about that. But I think, Stephen gave us a good segue and linking the conversation around financing and priorities to the Parish Development Model. And this is a big instrument that the government is rallying all of us around to be able to support, to touch the people on the ground, and as His Excellency says, the Wananchi, where the conversation is. So we have the PDM Secretariat also to contribute to the conversation. Please introduce yourself as you do. But what we want to hear from you, I mean, listening in around priorities and listening in around financing, how do we connect it in a strategic way to the PDM conversation and model? And how can we leverage catalytic resources to bring the transformation that we are seeking on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Moderator. Right Honorable Prime Minister and the Ministers, Permanent Secretaries, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julius Kapwepwe Mshambi. I work as technical advisor for the Parish Development Model, representing Honorable Jovrin Karisa, the Deputy National Coordinator. I'm not Jovrin myself. I'm glad to be here. And I think we need first and foremost to recognize, thank God, but also recognize the government's contribution that this far we have come. Unlike what Ndugu Asimo was describing on what is happening on the southern part of this Great Lakes region, here we can sit comfortably and have a conversation of this nature. I would like that we clap for God and also clap for the government. I'd also quickly add that on 21st of March 2021, Cabinet, whose CEO is His Excellency the President, President Museveni, agreed and approved that there shall be the Parish Development Model. When you look at the Parish Development Model, 7 tenets that were given to us of production, I just read verbatim, of agricultural value chain development as component number 1, of infrastructure and economic services as number 2, financial inclusion as number 3, social services as number 4, community mobilization and mindset change as number 5, parish-based management information system as number 6, then governance and administration. It is clear that those components are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. With just 8 years away to go, we believe that through the Parish Development Model, by making efforts to implementing the manifesto of the NRM government, National Development Plan 3, His Excellency directives that were given to the Cabinet of 2016 when it was being ushered in, as well as the current one of 2021, we can be able to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. And quickly then what I will come to is to note that if you looked at just one component, for instance, of the Parish Development Model, just one because we don't have all the time, agricultural value chain development, as you hear the word, quickly makes a contribution to SDG number 1 directly, SDG number 2 on ending hunger, to SDG number 8 on sustained inclusive and economic growth, to SDG number 10 on reduced inequalities and the ambition to have to make sure that that happens localized here in our own country situation, sustainable consumption and production, which is SDG 12, SDG 13 on climate action, SDG 15, wow, a mouthful, SDG 17 for lack of all the time. So I think what we need now to do is to say that we have talked enough in the boardrooms and under the ACs. Let us go to the parish, mobilize our people, and foster production and productivity. As the private sector has highlighted, the money is out there, and if you invest, for instance, in infrastructure and economic services, as a particular case, we have nice highways now, thanks to the NRM this far, but also community roads, a particular product, an avocado, has to come from a farmer somewhere. Maybe it comes in a basket. It comes to the parish level at a certain center. Maybe from there to the next point, it goes by a border. Maybe from there to the district level where there is a bigger common point, it goes by a truck. And then eventually by a bigger truck, maybe a trailer, it makes its way to Entebbe Airport or even directly by road to destination, to market destination. So production is going to be the hinge pin for the parish development model, and by realizing that, which government is definitely committed to, we will be making substantial contributions even within the 8 years remaining to be able to realize the sustainable development goals. So the financing is to do with the other budget resources that we are talking about, as you've seen in the recent budget prospects. There's so much money in terms of enabling the country to take off, but also ensuring that there is value for money and accountability, which is also a key point that government is emphasizing so that we can see produce coming to the markets. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you did a very good linkage between what Mr. Asimwe talked about in terms of international trade and positioning Uganda, and how we use the parish development model, especially the pillar 1 on agriculture and value chain addition, and linking that together. But I want you to speak a bit about, we're going to be receiving funding from government. How do we use it in a very strategic way in terms of its efficient use, but also how can it leverage more? Do you have some reflections on that? If you do, please let us know.
Government has established an elaborate mechanism on how every shilling counts for PDM, but also for general implementation across the country. So once we adhere to that, we'll be able to. Secondly, government has made focus on categories of those kinds of people that are able to engage into production. The 39% of the population that hitherto has been lingering on the other side, idle and or not supported, and that this time, those are also going to be added on board of production and productivity, and there are clear entries on how that is going to happen. And I think we'll see a lot of production and income coming, not only to the households, but also to the market as we increase our aggregate demand and productivity. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. The conversation is still going on, right, Honorable Prime Minister. I think we will try to, bridge the time a bit because we lost a bit of time earlier on. I would want to give a chance at some moment soon for the distinguished audience to share some reflections as well. So I think if there's somebody who is going to go around with their microphones, please be on standby. But before that happens, I think, Mr. Chimboa, you're listening in very intently, and you gave a very compelling introduction earlier on. How do you connect the dots? And I think also to give you a chance to speak whilst the Prime Minister is here, to hone on one or two things that are key in terms of our conversations today. Yeah. Yes. I hope I pronounced the name well and you didn't miss that.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. What I mentioned earlier on, good people, is that in Uganda we don't have a large stock of bankable investment-ready projects. But there are ways to attract this funding, which is available internationally. It's very possible to raise this money. And I mentioned about 5 steps, which is the kind of format that various entities in various places can use, stating very clearly what the challenge is. Identification of the SDG pain point. Where is it? What are the activities we are going to do? Who is responsible? Who has to be consulted? Whose support do we need? And so on. So we've gone through this very clearly. But I've also mentioned that we are also looking at, for instance, changing the business model. For instance, because I said I'm wearing about 2-3 hats. I'm chairman NSSF, but I'm also from the CEO Summit, which is private sector, and works a lot with the Prime Minister's office. And we are also in the area of bringing the conversation of SDG right into the boardroom and making sure that strategies and budgets within the various organizations can plant a seed and increase speed and also scaling the impacts. In the business world, it's all about measurement. There is no talking. It is moving from talking to actions, measurable metrics that have to be delivered. You have to show exactly what improvement you are making. In our kind of work and are getting from COVID-19, progress is not making improvements. It's about bouncing back and bouncing forward. I mentioned earlier on that Mr. Keith Makanizi, who is present here, probably saw this a little earlier and said, can we get the private sector chief executives, whom I'm partly representing here, chief executives in this country, to support government of Uganda in funding activities in the area of education, in the area of health. And the chief executives in Uganda have been grouped in clusters in accordance with SDGs. And the issue here is exactly how much, what is each chief executive doing? So what has happened is a critical mass in Uganda now is moving away from corporate social responsibility. The kind of stuff you see in newspapers every Monday morning. People holding up buckets, they have given people in sorority. Now they have given a pump this one, so that kind of paradigm is dead. The purpose of our intervention in the SDGs is maintaining a long-term engagement where activities are clear, measurement and metrics are clear, a common backbone clear. In fact, I'm hoping that the Prime Minister's office will organize a solidarity forum where chief executives of the top 40 companies come here to demonstrate how much they have done and what they are planning to do and how they are supporting government. And again, we are going to call upon the Prime Minister's office to organize people like in Bank of Uganda, all the regulators. Among the, because I've been director in banks, and I know what goes on, banks should not only talk about financials, we should also talk about non-financials every year. Then we go to the Electricity Regulatory Authority. Then we go to Uganda Retirement Benefit Authority. All the authorities in Uganda must demand an SDG statement at the end of the year and what impact they have handled. Challenge, solution, and impact.
Okay. Challenge, solutions, and impact. Thank you very much, Dr. Chimboa. I think, right, Honorable Prime Minister, the conversation, as he was talking about, is really speaking to the issues around structural transformation. We can't do business as usual, even for the private sector. And I think over time, I mean, what we have been doing is managing poverty. That's the reality. And we need to move away from that to really look at structural transformation and how the private sector comes on board. So without much ado, I crave your indulgence, Right Honourable Prime Minister, to hear from one or two people in the audience, just to give them a chance to also reflect on the subject this morning. And the conversation is around priorities and financing for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the context of Uganda, SDGs is the NDB3, it is the PDM, it is the Vision 2040. Anybody wants to speak? Right. We do have the Right Honourable Justin Kasule Lumumba. Please give her the floor. I see one lady behind, we go, and then a gentleman there. And if I don't have anybody at the corner here, we would, we have a lady here. So I'll take 4. And we'll see what we're doing with time. Right Honourable Lumumba, please. Please help her with her microphone, or please give another one.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Moderator, and I want to thank the team that has shared with us information. When they talk about the bankable projects here, I think now, as Office of the Prime Minister, and I'm privileged that in the presence of the Prime Minister, we agreed that the Ministry of Finance should really simplify some of this, especially for people in the private sector. It is not easy for the ordinary people, but also investors, to go and do all the research and have the paperwork ready. And it's so costly and expensive. So under the leadership of His Excellency, when we were launching the NRM manifesto, he said, and it's in our manifesto, that the Ministry of Finance should do this using the different institutions that fall under the ministry and financed by government, so that whoever wants to invest here, there is sufficient knowledge for somebody to take a decision. And that will also help on reduce on issues of time wasting to do the research and the visibility studies, but also at the same time to know where to invest and in what to invest. So it is us now to take it up with the Ministry of Finance so that this is simplified. Then also, when we talk about the relationship between the Parish Development Model and the SDGs, when you look at our literature about this, the Parish Development Model, emphasis has been put so much on the issue of on SDG 1, no poverty. Because once you solve the issue of poverty, people will have food. And once they have food, they will think and they will be able to invest in all others. Once they have the resources, those resources will help them not to have hunger. Those resources will help them to be able to access education and also contribute to the education sector beyond what they are offering in terms of the fees, that the bills that they meet, but also do more corporate responsibility. And Mr. Chimbo has brought in the issue of corporate investment. So it will be an investment because they will be doing it in the areas where they belong and to which their children and grandchildren must benefit. It will also help us be able to understand the effects of the environmental issues, the impact on their activities. And when you look at this, where we are stressing the issue of value addition, is sustainability, the shelf life for our products. So surely under the Parish Development Model, the President said, concentrate more on no poverty, SDG number 1. And once you work on that and succeed, that is the key to unlock the other SDGs. Lastly, we have said we should organize meetings as Office of the Prime Minister. This we shall do. The issue to do with the solidarity platform, but also we would also use that opportunity for both the people in the private sector, the CEOs, but also the senior technical people in the ministries to know that soon it will be a requirement for somebody, if you are applying for jobs, whether locally here or internationally, you must also demonstrate, as part of the requirements, you must demonstrate knowledge about SDGs, because it's also not useful for you to take up a job as a regulator, executive director, but then you don't know what SDGs are all about. Then that means you cannot think comprehensively and plan for us well and implement well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Right Honorable Kasule. We had somebody here, Mr. Mumuza, here. You are close to, okay, if the person is close by you, please. Because, Mr. Keith.
Thank you very much, Moderator. I don't want to take time. I know we have time constraint. First of all, I just want to ask my team who are taking notes to take notes of what has been presented. I thought the moderators have been tremendous and excellent in making recommendations on how we move forward. And I think you should clap for them. I don't have much to add, but I just want to say one thing. What Mr. Bona, or Dr. Bona, sorry, I don't want to go, I have had enough in my life. Dr. Bona talked about fiscal space. As you know, I was Secretary Treasurer for a long period and Deputy and all many years. The fiscal space now is not there. Not only in Uganda, but in all African countries now. Why? Because when we did projections, we didn't think, we didn't have this external shock, which is COVID. So you projected the economy to grow at 6%. Of course, everything goes around it, including revenue. So you borrow. I see people every time talk about this. Debt has increased, so-called all countries, all human beings, that's why there are banks, the financial sector, borrow. It's the ratios and how much you use to pay debt become a problem. So when you have put revenue, projected that it will grow 6% and to grow at 3%, know that something has gone wrong because that everything goes with it. Now, so what can be done, therefore, because what we are doing here will fit into UN system. I think next month or something like that. What can be done at international level to help African countries and the poor countries to leverage debt in such a way, because it has not been created by wrong things. Africa has done a lot in terms of infrastructure, or education, in the last 15, 20 years. It's not that money has been misused, as many people talk, commentators. But nevertheless, there has been a horrible shock to the economy, which is true of Europe. Europe has, and America have printed money because they can absorb it. You can't print money like the Europeans, which were doing COVID time, because to create inflation, as you may see. So, what can all be done at international level to leverage debt in such a way that we have debt relief to release resources for SDGs? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, P.S. Keith. I want to go with the order. There was a lady here, please. First of all, let's take her. We've been hearing a few reflections. Keep it short and sweet because we have to try and wrap up for the Right Honorable Prime Minister to speak.
Thank you, Moderator. My name is Patricia Kishemere. I am a nutritionist and more interested in the food systems transformation. According to the exposition that was done by the first speaker and the subsequent reports, we can all see that some goals, some SDG goals contribute more to the 53% where we are now than the others, particularly SDG 2. During COVID-19, the hungry households or those households that didn't have food increased from 37% to 39%. I think that in driving these SDGs forward, we need to shift from linear agriculture value chain to circular food systems. Because according to the PDM, as it was exposed, when you go, these people have been capacitated to grow food and add value. But we also see that there is a big problem on food waste and loss. Whereas people are becoming hungry, food represents the largest composition of solid food waste in Kampala, for example, according to the KCCA report. But also, during the stages of production, for example, harvesting, we see a lot of loss of food, and we continue to grapple with the hunger in the country. So there is need to focus more on transforming food systems from this linear value chain to circular, where you know that what do you grow? If you have land, whether small or big, how do you optimally use it to grow food, to sustain the family, and also bring about economic development? We don't have sustainable land use models in this PDM system. People don't also know what crops they can grow, which ones are quickly maturing, or which ones are nutrient dense. We have food, but we have malnutrition increasing every day. So I think that we need to prioritize SDG 2, especially because it affects all the goals. And more importantly, we need to put food systems into sector practice. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that salient point in terms of moving away from linear approaches to secular approaches. I think I will take, there was a person at the back. Do you still want to speak? Let's be quick, and then the lady here, and then I'll close the chapter.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Floor, but you have taken it, so afterwards you will speak at the back.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. My name is Caroline Kimbabas, and I work with State House as Assistant Private Secretary in line with poverty alleviation. So when they talk about SDG and they say no poverty as #1, and I look at what the government is doing to end poverty in Uganda, I now see what SDG is talking about. So I really want this conference to focus about how can we change people from poverty to prosperity. We can get SDGs and relate it to Parish Development Model, because when we look at National Development Plan and Cooperation Framework, we looked at what is affecting our people, the problems of unemployment, the problems of no food, the problems of environment. We brought them to table. But I would love to ask the Office of the Prime Minister to localize these programs to vernacular languages, relate them with the well-being of the people on the ground. Because when you look at a national program and you relate it with what the people are going through, it gives us solutions to end poverty, to end unemployment, to end all sorts of problems. So I'll call upon the Office of the Prime Minister to work hand in hand with Parish Development Model, relate it with SDGs, and relate it to National Development Plan. We come up with a solution. I thank you so much. May God bless you for God and my country.
Thank you. So we take, I crave your indulgence, Right Honourable Prime Minister, for some 10 minutes because we lost 40 earlier on. I take the gentleman at the back and the lady here, and I think I'll close it. Sorry. Is there a way we can get the reflections from people? Write your points down, and we will take it forward in the interest of time, please. Keep it short and sweet, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, the Prime Minister, all dignitaries present, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sebastian, Segawa Ivan Sebastian, and I am the former EAC Youth Ambassador to Uganda. My reflection is going to be specific, not to our local context, but to our regional and continental framework. And I know that as a country, we are committed to the East African community, to the integration of the region, but also we have signed instruments at a continental level. And I will give the example of the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that we are signatory to. And I know that we are working to achieve the SDGs, but my question, and I think my question will go to the panelists, mostly from the PSFU and to government, on how we are working to get the most optimal outcomes of such interactions and such commitments we have placed our country to. Just to give two examples. One is that...
keep it to one example, sorry.
One example, yes. Is that when the AFCFTA comes, we are opening up our market, our economy to trade with other African countries. But how are we preparing to say that Uganda, for example, is going to be a hegemony or a supplier of a particular product to Africa, as opposed to constantly being consumers and ultimately committing our country to opening up to economies, but not ultimately benefiting as people who supply that economy in itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll take the last one.
Thank you. My name is Alana Kembabazi with the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. One of the things that it's a great discussion. Thank you to all the panelists. One of the things that I haven't had is on public services. So when you think SDG 3 for health, education, but we had a bit about roads and their centrality, particularly in the parish model. It doesn't make sense if you're putting all this money to get us, like Julia said, you have such transport in the avocado, you go to like, if you're like a Shenshaw area, you look at the state of that road, by the time you're getting things to the market, things are spoiled. Running water. And so I think we need to be able to think through. Someone asked me, do we eat the SDGs? Ugandans see the SDGs if they find drugs in their facilities, if there's education. So when it comes to issues of financing, Mr. Mahakanizi did talk about, again, just no money. But we are losing the equivalent of half of our health budget, for example, in illicit financial flows. If you curb that money, that is 50% more for health. You are starting parish model, but we need to begin to think about where are these leakages, where is money going to tax havens. We can thank the private sector for what they do, but they cannot fill the gap by government. They do have to look at their bottom line and their area. Even in the parish model, for example, it is being marketed as get you out of poverty, give you some money. I was in the communities just last week and everyone is expecting this money. But it's a bigger model. It is supposed to integrate health, education, roads, all of that, these public services. So it is to urge the Office of the Prime Minister to communicate more effectively about the breadth of this parish model, and two, to really think, to hear questions about where the country will get the money, beyond taxing an already overburdened private sector by curbing the leakages, curbing illicit financial flows. Thank you.
All right, a couple of governance questions around there. I crave your indulgence. I can see people want to really speak. Somebody's hand has been up, and he's very determined. So maybe, Right Honourable, if you may permit me to take one more, but please really keep it short. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Katagaya. I'm a social entrepreneur, and by that I create solutions for problems affecting society. In 2015, I started Mechanica.com, working with car mechanics to sort of professionalize the garage, as you know it, into a modern business that serves their customers excellently. In 2016, because of my background working in data, I created a solution, Evidence and Methods Lab, working with organizations to create data. Now, I will speak by Unleash. Unleash is a global initiative to rally young innovators. Every year they pick 1,000 young innovators and take them to a city across the world and try to work on SDG solutions for SDGs. Now, coming back to my experience doing business here, you know, I'm on the streets, but I also am lucky because I work with OPM, I've worked with civil society, and now I'm in business. I want to tell people in this room a secret. When I'm on the other side with the young people who are struggling to create solutions in the business hubs, in the innovation hubs, they are trying to connect with people up here where we are in this room to try and find credit, try and find business deals. Now, when I'm on the other side in those rooms with those fellow innovators, this is what they say. Right? What they mean that there is so much English up here are the people who have the money. When you go to these institutions, they ask too many questions. So you're asking a young person who is creating an IT solution to help change how education works, to help fix judiciary. But when they have to access credit, the restrictions are too many. Yesterday I was at a bank. Makanika got an opportunity to be a big distributor for an oil company. So the money is crazy, it's a lot, we don't have it. So I went to the bank and I met 2 bankers. And these are usually interesting conversations I have with bankers, because they don't understand, many of them don't understand the street. So I go, I'm looking for credit, and then they said, oh, to give you money, you must have 2 things. Either, one of 2 things, either bonds or fixed deposit. So I sat back and laughed. I said, I am coming to pick money to be able to do work, and then you are asking me for money, because fixed deposit really
go straight to the point. What's the point?
Can we make Uganda is the most, they say, entrepreneur country, and many people are creating solutions to things like SDGs, fixing education, fixing health, while they make some money. Can we also make Uganda the country where it is easiest to access financing? If we can make that our goal, it will be easier for us to achieve the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Right Honourable Prime Minister, distinguished guests. We are gradually coming to the end of our very exciting and spirited conversation on financing and priorities for the SDGs in Uganda. I'll give a chance to the panelists to just a minute each, share your final thoughts and also respond to some of the questions that came. I will then summarize our deliberations, some of the big picture things coming out, and then we'll close shop, and then I'll hand over to the super MC later on. Please, let's start with you, Dr. Chimboa.
First of all, everything starts with the policy. I would like to appeal to the Honorable Prime Minister. First of all, there is a cynical mindset among Ugandans. Uganda is going to grow, Uganda is going to develop irrespective of what. So that means that we have to start with the youth down there. Change the curriculum or modify it in school and have studies on SDGs right from primary school, and move forward to create something more. Any school that is going to be registered as an examination center needs to have a minimum of 2 or 5 acres of forest, something like that, because schools use a lot of other things and so on. So there has to be education from a very early stage, so that the mindset of Uganda is going forward with regard to SDG starts from the lower level. The second one is Prime Minister's office to work with the private sector, with even people like NSSF, to see exactly the companies, the top 500 companies paying the largest taxes. What are they doing in the space of SDGs? How are they moving forward? So we need to measure and be able to move on this point. The other one is, next time when we meet, we should be launching an SDG national fund, where many other stakeholders and funding agencies around the world can contribute. Just imagine that if we have this kind of fund, we can be a little more accountable to other financing agencies, and also take into account the fact that, one, there is corruption, there is bureaucracy at the lower levels, there is, as I said, cultural handicaps, and there is witchcraft and all those things. So we will have to address those ones. As we talk about Parish Development Model, we need to look at the risks at the bottom there. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Mr. Chimboa. I got his name right. In the morning I asked him, is it Kimboa or Chimboa? And he said it's Chimboa. So I think I've been consistent with that, and you need to clap for me. On a lighter note. Please, Stephen.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick on this one. There's so much we can talk about. Our latest push is for markets. And I want to thank government. We went to Congo 2 weeks ago. We saw a fantastic market. We want to thank His Excellency, the President, who facilitated us with the Uganda Airlines from Kinshasa to Goma. Big market, huge. One of the things we want is to give us space on the border, create export processing zones very quickly so that our products can go there and access those markets. Those guys are big spenders. They are buying water from Italy, gizzards from Turkey, offals from Brazil. These things we have here. We are using our roads to take Nido to Congo when we have our milk, Lato. It is here. Our tomatoes, our everything is there. We are going to Sudan next week, and to ensure that we fix that. So we need infrastructure. We need those export processing areas. We need export financing. Uganda is rich. Our people's products are here. We shall work with government. We shall help with design. And on the issue of, I think somebody was talking about the SCFTA, we trained 250 export-ready SMEs. And Elsie, I want to thank you for that support. Can you believe we went to Kinshasa and our people from Movit were exporting their things to Congo, Brazzaville, across the border? And it's exciting to see that the majority of the young people went with the DRC. We are less, they are below the age of 35. So help us on export, on infrastructure, but also in the areas of non-tariff barriers. Very quickly, thank you, Madam Prime Minister, and thanks to the President. When the President of Tanzania came here about a month ago, we had 4 hours with her. In that meeting, private sector presented their challenges, and I can say with confidence right now that now our trucks are going freely to Tanzania. Tanzania is going to buy our poles, our dairy, our milk, our sugar, and they have closed the gaps on infrastructure. Goods can now move from Dar es Salaam to Port Bell in 72 hours. Those are the things we need. An enabling environment, financial support, appropriate technology, appropriate financing, and an enabling environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simwe, for those big picture conclusions. Let's go to Dr. Marius. We can't hear you. Can you use the microphone?
I want to respond to my friend Keith when he states that there is no more physical space. I want to repeat, physical space still exists. Can I repeat? Physical space still exists. From my experience in Liberia when I was there under USAID-funded program on governance and economic management as an advisor to the Finance Ministry. Now, one of the ways which we created physical space was to introduce what we call efficiency gain. By efficiency gain here, to stop leakages in government resources, including corruption. The World Bank estimates that a good amount of money gets lost in Uganda, in billions. Now, if you can minimize that, you are creating a lot of physical space for government to spend that money elsewhere. So there is no way for one to say that there's no physical space. There is, and so long as there's a will to do that. The second one also is to partner with private sector. We have what we call public-private partnership. The private sector comes with money, to make profits. The government protects the interest of the public. That partnership works very well in a number of countries. But what you need is a very well laid out professional PPP unit that is professional enough to see that the private sector doesn't come in to rip off government. In fact, the PPP, you could look at it as a pendulum between privatization and government ownership. The closer it is to privatization, the more likely that the government will be kicked out of the partnership. So there is a lot of literature on PPP, which I think is one of the physical spaces that are still existing. In short, physical space does exist.
Well, thank you. Very good schools of thought here, whether physical space exists or it doesn't exist. We've heard you, and I think the conversation must continue. And a final reflections, PDM.
Thank you, Moderator. Yes, I agree with you, Mr. Katagaya, on the issue of credit. And that's why, for instance, under the Parish Development Model, government came in and said that I'll offer a grant to all the 10,594 parishes in this country. I think that is something that is unprecedented. Of course, then through the parish circles, but then people are able to access cheap credit. So far, the cheapest on the market at 6% per annum. 5% interest plus 1 for purposes of inflation. Of course, we can have a side intellectual debate around that, whether the 1% is realistic or not. But so far, that is where we are, and I think that is welcome. And that is going to spur the production, because the PDM is looking at food security, which comes in with the linear agricultural value chain versus the circular. Food security, wealth creation, employment creation, and then service delivery. I think bringing the whole of government to ensure that all these aspects by ambition happen is something that is going to get us to the land of Canaan. And lastly, on what Keith raises, I agree with him that in another forum, we will need to have a discussion on how we can use, for instance, those opportunities of debt relief for purposes of financing some of these ambitions. But I think focusing on the domestic, linking the micro production, take advantage of the macro stability that we have, and taking advantage of, say, aspects like the East African community that we have come into, to tap into those markets for purposes of improving our fiscal space here is going to be one of the anchor areas to focus on. Thank you.
All right, so a round of applause for all the panelists. Thank you very much for the generosity. Right, Honorable Prime Minister, I'll be concluding very soon. And in conclusion, this morning, we have been discussing the issues around priorities and financing for the SDGs, and in the context of Uganda, our SDGs are our National Development Plan, our Vision 2040, PDM, and many other things that we have. We have, I think, coalesced around a number of major points, and I'll try to summarize them in clusters without going through all the little details that were discussed. I think there was a very huge emphasis around how we trigger investments. And amongst others, the question around how we position for bankable projects, how we simplify the procedures, and importantly also the question around trade. And I want to use the opportunity to also expand a bit on the question that the young man asked around the African Free Trade Continental Area Agreement and how we position ourselves. And I think, right, Honourable Prime Minister, one of the things we would like for you to push and support within government, especially our conversations with the Ministry of Trade, is for Uganda to conclude its own strategy on how we want to engage. Which of the products do we want to exchange with other African countries? We are not there yet. So we need to position for that. And the other thing is also to see what kind of facilities can help with, export financing, logistics, other things. We've done a lot of work with the private sector now in terms of awareness raising, and I think that needs to continue. Last year, we took a group of 20 young Ugandans to Ghana for the first time. And whilst profound, it's also very sad in many ways. We went to a place we said we wanted African coffee. And my own people say, we don't have African coffee. We don't do African coffee. We have something else. I don't want to mention the name. But the question is that they don't even know that Uganda produces coffee. It is that bad. How do we encourage our young people to even understand the markets elsewhere? And when they came back, it was just a delight to know that one of them has already gotten contracts from Ghana already, just by connecting the youth. And it's very important for us to continue doing that. So I just want to encourage that we push that agenda, because there is a fundamental paradox that we have everything it takes to prosper as a continent, as a country, and yet we still wallow in poverty. I mean, it's something that we need to be able to change. The second thing I think that is coming through the conversation is around accelerators. Where do we need to accelerate? And what kind of areas would push the other SDGs together? And I think there was conversations around, let's focus perhaps on SDG number 1 on poverty, because once we deal with that, we deal with the others in tandem. SDG number 2 came out very strongly, digitalization, for example. So some deeper reflections, I think, moving forward on where should the accelerators be, because we can't be doing everything at the same time and with the same speed. The third thing that has come out of the conversation, right, Honourable Prime Minister, is the enabling environment, and I think the private sector talked a lot about that. Issues around peace and security, issues around infrastructure, issues around export financing, technology, and many others, that in many countries, exporters are facilitated, including the developed countries. This is not something that we can just leave by themselves to happen. We need to be able to do that. The fourth thing that is emerging from our conversation is governance. And here we're not talking political governance. We are also talking governance of things. How do we manage our finances? Issues around corruption, issues around illicit financial flows, issues around efficiency, rationalizing the use of existing resources. These are the things that are coming out, and those are governance questions that are coming out. The other thing that is coming out is innovation. And this is very important. Uganda is one of the most innovative countries on earth. But many innovators and startups don't see their second or third birthday. How do we support young women and men, innovators, make sure that we ground them, and make sure that they create the jobs of the future for our beloved Pearl of Africa? And then I think finally, we've talked about partnerships, whether it's through PPPs, and I think there was a request which has been honored by government on the CEOs to meet with OPM and the Prime Minister to really strategize a lot more on what more can be done. I'll leave the debate on fiscal space to the economists and the specialists later on, but I think it is very important conversation that needs to move ahead. So on that note, let me thank you all for joining this conversation, and let me thank you once again for giving us an opportunity as United Nations family to moderate this session. And my name is Elsie Atefa, and I hand back to the super moderator, Mildred Tuhaisen. Thank you. We can take our seats, panelists.
Thank you very much, Ms. Elsie Atafua, and thank you so much to the panelists. Another bigger round of applause to all of our panelists. And to the audience for the engagement. That was a very, very heated engagement that is talking about the solutions. Like I say, today our main goal here is to be able to share the ideas. Yes, there are the challenges, but how do we find solutions to those challenges and be able to get to our goal that we particularly require? We're getting closer to our guest of honor, the Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, who is also actually in the second heart representing the President of the Republic of Uganda, His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. And as well, I want to say congratulations to you, Right Honorable, for your first year in office. It's been great work. Let's give her a round of applause and congratulate her. It's been 1 year of a lot of action. It feels like you've been in that office for the last 5 years, but well, it's just a little more time to go. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get our speakers to talk to us, it's been a journey since 2015, adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, with Uganda fast-tracking and getting a focal minister, getting an SDG secretariat. What has that journey been like? Let's just take a few minutes to pay attention to this video, which is describing that journey that we have taken. To the technical team, let's take a look.
In 2015, when Uganda held the presidency of the UN General Assembly, 193 member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its associated 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. At the heart of the SDGs was a pledge to leave no one behind and to reach the farthest first.
During the period of the 69th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the UN member states have finally agreed on the all-important SDGs, 17 of them. The convergence of analysis and solutions, the convergence of diagnosis and prescription is a landmark in the history of mankind.
Member states all over the globe committed not only to reducing poverty, but also eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, to combat inequality, to fight climate change, to ensure gender equality, and to ensure universal access to quality healthcare and universal education, with human rights of all people at the front and center. Since the adoption of the SDGs, the government has implemented an inclusive process to ensure that the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs are owned by the people and are localized.
At the heart of the 2030 Agenda was a pledge to leave no one behind. It meant that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and targets should be met for everyone, with a particular focus on the poorest, most vulnerable, and further behind, people who indeed are often left out.
Institutional delivery of the SDGs is guided by a multi-stakeholder national SDG coordination framework, which is executed through 5 multi-stakeholders technical working groups to facilitate integration and alignment of national development frameworks to the SDGs. Production of data and statistics, financing and resource mobilization for SDGs, communication and popularization of SDGs, coordination, monitoring and reporting progress on the implementation of SDGs. In 2018, the government of Uganda, with support Uganda's 3rd National Development Plan, is at least 90% aligned to the SDGs. In July 2020, government presented Uganda's 2nd voluntary national review report to the UN High-Level Political Forum and is scheduled to schedule the 3rd report next year in 2023. District local governments have also been continuously engaged to implement local initiatives, including local financing initiatives to support implementation of SDGs and voluntary local reviews conducted in 10 districts so far. The government continues to work with different partners and stakeholders in the quest to achieve the SDGs. In 2020, the government approved the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, which highlights strategies and contributions of the United Nations to the implementation of the 3rd National Development Plan and the SDGs up to 2025. With government working with civil society organizations on the localizations of the SDGs, several campaigns have been launched, such as Tonde Kamabega. In addition, the SDG private sector platform was launched in 2021 to mobilize the private sector players to not only support implementation but also to leverage and benefit from the SDGs. The Youth Coalition for SDGs has played a role in raising awareness about the SDGs and mobilizing young people as agents of change towards the world we want. After the adoption of the 2030 agenda and even with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, Uganda continues to see promising progress on most of the SDGs. Thanks to all Ugandans and partners who supported and stood with the government of Uganda during this time. Before the COVID-19 outbreak, the economy had registered strong recovery and was projected to grow at 6.0% in 2019-2020. The poverty level has reduced slightly from 21.4% in the 2017 to 20.3% in 2020, with a decrease in the total number of poor persons from 7.1 million to 7 million in the same period. A resilient health system that has, for instance, been able to withstand and manage the shocks of COVID-19, continued progress on gender equality and women empowerment as evinced from the women participation and representation in local governments, parliament and cabinet. Electricity access rate from 14.5% in 2015 to 28% in 2021 due to increased generation capacity and rural electrification programs as a means of accelerating efforts of increased access to clean energy. The government continues to implement poverty reduction and employment creation programs by supporting women-led businesses, youth livelihood programs and Emioga, in addition to social protection programs for the elderly. Increases in proportion of national paved roads from 80% in 2017 to 93% in 2020. Number of people covered by a mobile network by technology from 20.2 million in 2015 to 25.6 million in 2020. Although the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed sustainable development challenges, the outlook is positive. Uganda's resolve to achieve the SDGs remains unshaken. Our path to recovery from COVID-19 must and will be aligned to our SDG journey. As we continue on this collective journey, we commit to our promise to the people of Uganda and to the planet. No one will be left behind.
As government, we also recognize that more work needs to be done in order to meet the set 2030 targets. In particular, there is need to actively involve more Ugandans in the planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting of SDG interventions, so that communities are not merely beneficiaries, but active participants in the process.
bigger round of applause. That's been the journey so far. And despite COVID-19 and all the other issues, we will definitely continue to move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I also recognize the presence of the Japan ambassador, that is Ambassador Fukuzawa. Thank you so much. You can wave to us. Thank you for sparing your time to be with us. Right, Honorable, I kindly request just 3 minutes of your time for these children right here who have a special message in a poem to present to us from Plan International. Kindly, please tape up as quickly as possible. Just 3 minutes and we'll go into the speeches and you will officially close this off before you can leave us.
Good afternoon. We're honored to be in your presence, Right Honorable Prime Minister Robin Nabanja. We are so honored to be in your presence, Mother Justine Lumumba, and all the hierarchy of leadership in all your respective places. We are so happy for the audience. I'm Okumu Hannington, a girls advocate under Safer Cities Project from Plan International, and I'm with my fellows from different schools and different community-based organizations looking at development in our small areas. Be blessed as you listen to our poem, which is called The Impact of the Government. It's with
the happy tummies
that we,
the liberated souls,
sink in
liberation from gender-based violence
by the impact of the government. With unworried crystal clear expressions, the We Lives celebrate the improved equal education in Uganda that is being dominated by the gender-equated champions and Free Violet.
Gone are the days of terror,
where gender was the matter, but the government has strived and implemented a tough hand.
From a strong call of poverty by our parents to the ashes of a better living
and a better housing realm.
With a reducing high maternal mortality incidence,
the government's hand has strived to reduce on HIV and malaria death rates.
With improved free health centers. Oh, how determined she is. Improved quality education in our country. That is to say,
UPE,
USA,
and university scholarships
to the generation of this country, creating a lifelong learning opportunity for all. But
it's not over yet.
We dream of a world where all and each SDG is worked on. All SDGs, mainly the SDGs that look at a mother and a child. And I'll sing with us, or with you. SDG 1.
Increase job opportunities for young people.
SDG 1.
Reduce taxes on young people's job opportunities.
SDG 3.
More funding in the health sector so that medicine and medical workers are available.
SDG 3.
No child should die.
SDG 4.
No child should drop out of school.
SDG 4.
Improve on the quality of education.
Mostly
in remote areas and people with special needs.
SDG 4.
No longer better, but the best education is our desire.
And I will conclude with SDG 5. We look forward to a world where there is decreased child marriage. All children can access quality education, completion, and where boys and girls can lead. Not in the future, but now is the time where together we can achieve SDGs, leaving no one behind for God and my country.
A round of applause to Plan International, clearly elaborating the SDGs in their view. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go to our speeches, but right outside, as our guests do move out, we have an exhibition that is coming in, clearly crispy Ugandan coffee from Volcano Coffee, and also from the Ghetto Youth, we do have an exhibition of how they are trying their very best to recycle and keep the environment clean. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, allow me invite these particular guests to take to the front, and we'll have our last 3 speeches for this afternoon. I will invite the Right Honorable Prime Minister. Please feel free to take up a seat, and we will definitely have some social distancing right there. We will have the Right Honorable Justine Kasule Lumumba join in and accompany Honorable Murole Mukasa will join us, and to our UN resident rep, Madame Ngongi Namondo, you will as well be able to take it. But as you do take it up, Madame Ngongi Namondo, you will as well take to the podium and speak to us before we receive the Right Honorable Kasule Lumumba. A round of applause to our UN resident rep. Madame Lucina Chove, we would also request as Head of Public Service that you take the front seat. We have enough social distance here.
I think before I start, I really have to commend that excellent panel that we had earlier. Thank you so much to all the panelists and to Elsie, of course, for moderating. It's been one of the more value-added panels I have attended. Thank you so much. The Right Honorable Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, also recognizing that in this event you're representing His Excellency, who could not be with us today. The Right Honorable Minister in charge of General Duties and SDGs, our chaperone in this business of tracking the SDGs in country. And all the senior government officials who are present here with us today. Recognizing also all our partners, including the Ambassador of Japan. Thank you so much for coming. The partners from the private sector, the civil society organizations, academia. My own UN family, thanks for all the support, the pushing that has been done in this area, and standing on all the protocols that have already been observed. On behalf of the United Nations system in Uganda, I'm pleased to add my voice of welcome to this first Uganda annual conference on sustainable development goals, under the theme, Building Effective Models to Accelerate the SDGs in the Post-COVID-19 Era. I extend my utmost appreciation to the Office of the Prime Minister and the partnership with the United Nations system that has led to this stock-taking dialogue. There is absolutely no doubt that Uganda's high-level policy commitment to the 2030 agenda, which has been demonstrated on many fronts. The country has embedded the SDGs in its national development policies and strategies. The third National Development Plan is clearly aligned to the SDGs, and so are many of its indicators, I think more than 95% now, if I'm not mistaken. And the implementation of the NDP3 helps us directly quantify the implementation and achievements of these global goals. The UN also commends the government for regularly conducting and sharing reviews of progress at the global, at the national, and at the subnational levels. In fact, the fact that this national conference is happening is commendable in itself. It doesn't happen everywhere. The fact that it was preceded by regional dialogues is also testament to the government's commitment to inclusive dialogue on sustainable development. And the fact that Uganda has regularly gone on the global platform to tell the community of nations how it is doing is also very commendable. We heard the progress report from Dr. Albert earlier, and clearly there's progress across the board. I think that's not the issue. The issue, of course, is how to accelerate that progress. I think, Dr. Albert, to use some of your words, you even mentioned small progress. So there's progress, but we all want to feel this progress even more. So the conversation is how to accelerate the progress. And of course, as it's already come in the panel discussion earlier and speeches that have been made earlier, We continue to have and deal with unprecedented development challenges. I understand the PS said that we should move away from lamentations, but we cannot ignore, we still have to say, COVID has been absolutely massive in terms of its impacts. The impact of the war of Ukraine we're beginning to feel now, in terms of its multiple negative impacts on the economic growth, on price stability, on poverty reduction efforts, employment, the national debt levels, and the sustainable use of natural resources. We have slid back, so we have made progress. So we imagine that we would have made even more progress because we know that we have slid back in terms of our development gains. So while these challenges are mirrored pretty much everywhere in the world, for us in Uganda here, it's how to mitigate their negative effects and continue to advance on our development path despite them. And I know I say our because I'm associated to this development path. I add myself in the efforts of Uganda. And from what I can tell, really the plans are there. And the plans are good. 2 days ago, His Excellency the President was at the budget reading. We heard the budget. Clearly, it is aligned to priorities. The plans are good. So perhaps it's not the plans per se that we should really focus on in terms of acceleration. Perhaps we should be looking elsewhere. 2 years ago, a dynamic modeling work was done by the National Planning Authority. And it identified 3 accelerators. Perhaps in part of this conversation is confirming whether these are the same 3 accelerators 2 years later, having dealt with COVID and now with Ukraine. The 3 accelerators that were identified were the environment, focusing on the environment, governance, that came out in the panel discussion today, and industry. That these are 3 key SDG accelerators for Uganda. The exercise also recognized human capital development sectors of health, education, water, and sanitation as vital enablers for the attainment of Uganda's development objectives. As we deliberate over these 2 days, I would like to offer the following ideas and invite our collective reflection on them. Perhaps the first one to mention is development financing. That has been dealt with on the panel discussion very thoroughly. The only thing I would add is that it is commendable that the government of Uganda has articulated a public investment financing strategy, which we heard at the budget speech on Tuesday. We acknowledge that this strategy is aligned to the key components of the integrated national financing framework as guided by the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. And the UN family here is available to cooperate with the Ministry of Finance and its partners to implement this strategy as deemed useful by the government. I also hear from the panel discussion the mention of bankable projects. We know that in climate financing, for instance, there's a lot of resources there that are really, really hard to access. Perhaps this is another concerted area that we can put our heads together to support the development of bankable projects. Another area that I would like for us to, another idea for us to reflect on is that of coordination. Coordination is happening, obviously. We're just talking about enhancing coordination. In terms of implementing the development agenda, I think a lot of the hardest piece have already been done by government. We hear that often in terms of the speeches from His Excellency the President. We heard that today from some of the private sector colleagues. And I'm talking about I'm talking about security. Largely. Uganda has security and a strong government that can focus on its development agenda and has harmonized the various interest groups in the country. Because to be able to advance on a development agenda, you need these 2 critical elements. And we've already talked about the good plans that are in place. We have many planning instruments. Vision 2040 was mentioned, NDP3 was mentioned, the Parish Development Model that's coming on stream and its implementation underway has also been mentioned. So perhaps some of the efforts now should go towards enhancing the mechanisms that are already in place that would allow for an improved coordination in terms of all of government acting together In NDP3, there was the plan for having the program implementation action plans, the PIAPs, sorry if I'm not pronouncing it properly, and they have yet to be operationalized. Perhaps that's an area that can help us in terms of moving faster towards our development objectives. Alongside that, it would also be beneficial to improve the mechanisms that harmonize the coordination between government and its diverse range of development partners. The issue of debt was mentioned earlier. And we do have structures in place, but because of COVID, they have not met in a while. So perhaps another area where we can work on to try and accelerate progress would be that. We believe that creating a regular government-led, results-oriented and inclusive platform for dialogue on issues of concern would promote mutual trust and accountability between government and her development partners. A third area that I wanted to mention as an idea that we could also reflect on is population growth. I have lived in many countries that have really tiny populations, and like Comoros, for instance. And I understand that population size is an important catalyst for economic growth. So Uganda is blessed in that respect, that it has a population that's sizable enough to yield growth benefits. The only challenge is, in these difficult times, how to be able to make sure that the progress that the government is making, that the people are making, is felt by all Ugandans. This also came up earlier, and that's jobs. There is a need to look at jobs and the regulatory and policy ecosystems for the private sector. We need to accelerate the efforts in place to produce more decent jobs, building on the catalytic public investments by government. Government has been making a lot of investments, PDM and yoga. How do we build on those catalytic investments? And how do we work with the private sector to make sure that they can further these government investments towards more economic opportunities? And besides, more broadly, how can the private sector be further facilitated to support the economy grow in ways that would create jobs for all of our young people? I think that came out adequately in the first panel discussion. And the last point I wanted to offer is tracking our progress. How do we improve the country's capacity to measure progress on its development goals, and specifically the SDGs, which, as we know, as we mentioned earlier, are really consistent with the national development goals and plans and should be a priority for the national agenda. I think we all agree that this calls for additional resources to build the capacity of the national statistical system to produce and disseminate data and statistics to inform decision-making. This should be a collaborative effort between government, development partners, the private sector, academia, civil society, to fully utilize the advancements in the data landscape. And also in response to this is an area that the UN family has been working on. The UN in Uganda has committed to collaborate with the Uganda Bureau of Statistics to develop a joint program on data and statistics, trying to see how we can contribute to this. And lastly, this has been such a rich discussion, talking about what the country has done, what the government has done, the progress that it has made, ideas of how it can move further and faster. I'm wondering whether for the next conference of this nature, how we can make sure that it's more embedded in government, that we see, because all of these things are actually, the implementation is happening with the ministries, the departments, the agencies, etc. All of these ideas are how the work that is already being done will be done better. And I'm wondering if next time how we can better embed this very rich discussion we've had with the rest of government, the ministries, the departments, the agencies, etc. So those are my ideas. I know that there are many more. We got some ideas from the first panel discussion. I've added some of my own ideas, and I look forward to the conversation over the next day, the next 2 days. And I know that a lot of the ideas that are here not only would lead us in terms of how we improve implementation of these plans, but also I look forward to the insights on how it would enrich others in the upcoming high-level political forum that will be taking place in New York, where Uganda will be sharing some of its own ideas of how it's overcoming its challenges and learning from others on how they have overcome their challenges, and see some cross-fertilization. But really looking forward to the conversation, and thank you so much, Right Honorable Prime Minister and Right Honorable Minister, really for your teams and the effort in pulling us together for this first SDG conference. It cannot be understated how much effort that has been, and the commitment it shows that Uganda has towards the implementation of the SDGs. And actually Uganda should, because it was the midwife of these SDGs, as we saw in the video earlier. Thank you very much.
A big round of applause for Ms. Susan Ngongi Namondo, who is the UN Resident Coordinator and Designated Security Official. She talked about key areas, but I'll just highlight one when she mentions human capital development, and I totally agree that there is no country that can develop without investing in its own people. Probably the very reason why in this year's budget, the human capital development is second biggest shareholder, for lack of a better word, of the national budget, taking up to 8.7 trillion shillings. Ladies and gentlemen, I think a round of applause for the government for highlighting and not just talking, but going into actions. Like we said, we're moving from lamentations to the book of Acts into the issues of human capital development. Without any further ado, I humbly request the Right Honorable Justine Kasule Lumumba, who is the Minister for General Duties and also the Focal Minister for Sustainable Development Goals, to come speak to us. Will give us a report as well on where we are, but also I do request, Right Honorable, as you conclude, to invite our chief guest, the Prime Minister, who is also representing the President of the Republic. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. You can feel free to come.
Thank you so much, MC. Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, representing the President of the Republic of Uganda, but also the Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, at the same time, the head of all the people implementing the SDGs in this country, and coordinated by you in your office. Honorable Mululi Mukasa, the Minister for Public Service and also Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Honorable Alice Kaboyo, the Minister of State for Luwero Lwenzori Affairs. Permanent Secretary, the Head of Public Service and Secretary to Cabinet, Ms. Lucy Nachobe Mbonye, UN Country Representative and Coordinator and the UN Family, Permanent Secretaries, Heads of Diplomatic Missions and Agencies, representatives from the private sector, representatives from the civil society, representatives from the Interreligious Council, representatives from the media, representatives from the different groups, the youth, the women, security, those from the ghetto, the urban poor, the different people gathered here, those from the business community, the CEOs. We are all here, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take this opportunity in a special way to welcome Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, who is representing His Excellency the President. Can we clap for her again? I know we are all competing for the state time, but you have accorded us time. Though as our head, but still you had so many issues and institutions and in different sectors. I also want in a special way to welcome you members. Thank you for responding to our invitation. Clap for yourselves, please. I would want to welcome you to this first annual Sustainable Development Conference under the theme, Building Effective Models to Accelerate SDGs in the COVID-19 Era. I want to also take this opportunity to thank the first team we had, the panel, the moderator, and the panelists. Thank you. You opened our minds to why we are here, and we have to think beyond the ordinary. Thank you so much. This national conference is being held within the context of Uganda's efforts to implement the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted in 2015 by the member states of the United Nations. This universal plan for all countries across the globe focuses on ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring prosperity for all. At the global level, we have produced 2 SDG voluntary national review reports, and we will be producing the 3rd voluntary national review report in 2023. At the national level, we continue to track the progress in the implementation of the SDGs through the annual SDG status reports, the National Development Plan progress reports, as well as reports by the ministries, departments, and agencies, and through the local government's assessment reports. All these efforts are geared towards ensuring that we learn from our performance and take the necessary steps to improve how to achieve the overall development targets that we have set as a country. This platform will facilitate sharing of the ideas and good practices at local and national level and catalyze actions to achieve the 2030 agenda and the associated SDGs. The annual event will not only focus on mobilizing partners to support the implementation of SDG Roadmap 2021-2025, but will also continuously build momentum for cohesive national SDG coordination framework. To ensure that we espouse the principle of leave no one behind, events in the form of regional forums were organized from the 8th to the 13th of June 2022. These events were held in Mbale, in Hoima, and Gulu. Each event brought together over 200 participants drawn from the different regions. The regional forums were multi-sector holder platforms. That was also part of the effort of localizing, but also sensitizing and involvement of the different stakeholders who are involved in the implementation, but also as consumers and also beneficiaries of the different SDGs. The event were hosted by the Office of the Prime Minister, whose office is responsible for the 2030 Agenda Coordination in Uganda. The events were also attended by ministers, senior local government officials, United Nations experts, private sector partners, civil society organizations, religious leaders, cultural leaders, academia, and a selection of children from the Children's Parliament Initiative of the international NGO World Vision. All these stakeholders shared progress and discussed some of the development models and approaches that can support the acceleration of SDGs, as well as bottlenecks that need to be overcome for us to register better success. The key highlights from the regional forums consisted of the robust discussions on issues relating to SDGs implementation at the national and sub-national level. The local leaders expressed the desire to see more work done to localize the SDGs so that they can integrate all of this in their district development plans. They called on the central government, Right Honourable Prime Minister, I'm reporting to you. They called on the central government to continuously engage with them through these kinds of interactions where important reports are shared. And they also called on the team that we should get to a much lower level beyond the region and go to the districts, get down to the sub-counties, and finally to the parishes, which are going to be the center for planning and implementation of government plans. They called for capacity building in integrating the SDGs into their district development plans. They decried the financial resource challenges they are faced with and how these hamper their ability to attain their development objectives. And they recommended continuous engagements to improve their ability to provide better services to the people. The children who attended all the regional forums from the Children Parliament Initiative of World Vision were very impressive. The children held a panel discussion on each of the regional forums, and they discussed pertinent SDG issues affecting children in this country. Some of these areas, they raised several issues, which included the scourge of child marriage and its impact on children's livelihood, the effects of school closures on children, the effects of hunger on children in communities and schools, gender imbalance and the effect on girls and boys, and several other issues, which also included the challenges of water shortage in some of the communities, the effects of environmental degradation, that to be in particular, the team of children who came from Busia Tumbale, they talked about the mining in Tira in Busia, where as they clean the gold, they use machule and they pour that water in the sources where the communities get water from for home use. The children called for more investments in water sector, education, better working conditions for their teachers. They gave us an example that under UPE, they gave us the example that, yes, we have constructed the schools, but we have also provided, government has provided good environment that now the numbers of children have gone up, and we need to up our game on constructing classrooms, because a teacher sometimes has to squeeze herself to get the chalkboard to be able to teach the children. And also address the issue of the teacher-pupil ratio. Said we have the figure, but that's not so much reflected in all schools in these communities. Friendly children health services for children and adolescents, the rejection of corruption by all people, especially the children, and the need to continue to give children a voice in all development processes as part of the consumers, but also as part of the future leaders and users of the same services. The children shared with us these messages through a variety of methods that included panel discussion, drama, skits, and poems. This experience clearly indicates that as Uganda, we do have a bright future if our children continue to be part and be at the center of the development discussions. At this point, I want to inform those who are here and those who are online that today is the Day of the African Child. And for us as Uganda, it is going to be celebrated in Butaleja. But also, most importantly, want to tell you that under SDGs, the children are partners and contributors to issues that affect them when it comes to issues to do with SDGs. So I want to thank you so much, Right Honourable Prime Minister, for making this happen, that this is a day that is even being celebrated as we discuss issues to do with SDGs that affect the African child, inclusive the Ugandan child. The group discussions by the participants also raised several important issues. Participants raised critical issues relating to the impact of COVID-19 on the attainment of the several SDGs. In the meeting, we limited the group discussions to the SDGs under review this year, which include SDG 4, that is to do with education, SDG 5, that is on gender, SDG 14, that is underwater, and SDG 15 on life on land. Participants noted that on SDG 4, some of the major changes that emerged during the lockdown period included the introduction of home learning materials and different teaching and learning approaches that allowed limited education continuity in some areas during the COVID-19 lockdown. But they also pointed out that while in some places e-learning materials were introduced, the lack of internet was also another issue. Low income to purchase data by the parents or the students themselves, the timing of radio and TV education programs was also a challenge because some of them would happen at a time when we have either gone to the garden or gone to collect water. Like the children, issues of teenage pregnancy were a prominent topic in all the discussions. The participants noted that there were several opportunities that emerged, including the opportunities to improve the delivery of learning in the education sector by incorporating e-learning into the new curriculum. Some of the modules that can help accelerate education attainment that were mentioned include the use of parasocial teacher models at community levels that are based on citizen groups that support education. On gender equality, participants noted that while in some strong families the lockdown strengthened family ties, other areas the lockdown led to early marriages and high levels of gender-based violence. So there was both the positive and the negative. On SDG 14, some of the key issues rotated around increased cultivation in swamps during the lockdown and in some places where there is mining, child labor, and effects on toxic chemicals were mentioned clearly, especially in areas where mining of gold is going on. On SDG 15, the agricultural land expansion that destroyed wetlands was a major issue, especially as people migrated to villages during the pandemic. This increased pressure on the land and wetlands were not spared. The increase in the use of agricultural chemicals and the depletion of forest reserves came out prominently. Several modules were presented by the participants that could be used in accelerating SDGs. The parasocial models in education, the Korean model of development, mindset movement, the village savings and loans association models, the commercial village model, the Bonga youth model, sustainable and smart agriculture models in fishing, farming, maggot farming, and other types of natural resource-based models were discussed and shared with us. The government also presented its own models that included the NOSAF, the Parish Development Model, the Development Response to Displacement Impact Project, Dr. Deep, to mention but a few. My team will be working to document comprehensively on modules shared at the regional forums through a research process that will produce a compendium of approaches to accelerate the SDGs in the COVID era in Uganda. This publication will be available to share with interested stakeholders, and it will be available at our SDG Resource Hub at the SDG Secretariat. Overall, we had a very rewarding experience of learning and knowledge sharing, as well as galvanizing support for the implementation of the SDGs through the regional forums. We look forward to using the same energy at this national conference. And after this, we shall go to the lower levels of the districts and the sub-counties as agreed with the colleagues, the leaders at the regional level. Ladies and gentlemen, the successful implementation of Agenda 2030 requires an integrated approach, partnership, participation through inclusive political processes and responsiveness, effective accountability institutions. It will require various stakeholders to identify solutions for planning, budgeting, implementation, and monitoring progress towards achieving the SDGs, as well as tracking where and how funds are spent to curb corruption and assess the impact of these initiatives on the lives of the people, especially the women and the marginalized and disadvantaged groups. It is our hope, therefore, that this national conference will provide an opportunity for all of us to discuss and find creative solutions to our collective challenges as a country, a continent, and a globe. We continue in our national globe commitment to leaving no one behind and reaching to the farthest. I want to bring this to your attention, that when it comes to the slogans of the SDGs, of leaving no one behind and reaching to the farthest, the NRM government, under the leadership of His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, coordinated by Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, we have set out the Parish Development Model for us to be able to achieve getting to the parish, be accountable at household level as government, leaving no one behind, and reaching to the farthest, because every household, every village falls under parish in this country. We call on everybody to come and work with us to make sure we achieve the SDGs, putting more emphasis on no poverty. And once that is worked on, it has effects on all the rest. But noting that this country, there are those who are already above the poverty line. So the different teams are handled. We have the Parish Development Model for those at the lowest level. But like Dr. Albert Byaruhanga was explaining, we have for the big investors, for the different programs under government, coordinated in the Ministry of Finance, and also we have the middle, the small or medium income. Those are also catered for under the different programs. Let me end by thanking His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni for his stewardship, and also thank the Right Honorable Robin Anabanja for coordinating us as government. I also want to thank our development partners, the United Nations family through the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, UNDP, UN Women, UNFPA, UNSDE, UNICEF, that gave support and significant support at that. Civil society organizations, private sector, NGO World, NGO Forum, World Vision, Plan International, who have supported several processes as we go through, as we implement the SDGs. I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you, Right Honorable Prime Minister, for accepting to represent His Excellency, and for the panel that was here. The issues that you have raised, the Solidarity Forum, we shall have discussions, maximizing resources, and also making sure we avoid duplication in the government. It is our role, coordinated by the Prime Minister. The issue of localization, this we have dealt with. We've gone and had discussions with people in local governments, but we have also translated in the 12 languages, like Dr. Albert, the SDG coordinator, the Secretariat has brought it out. Most importantly, from the discussion as the focal minister for SDGs, I've taken it up, and we should have different meetings with you or different stakeholders to make sure we discuss one SDG one by one, so that we have in-depth discussion, and at the end of it, we should be able to generate ideas, have a report that can inform policy and also inform resource allocations when it comes to budgeting in the government, but also as the Prime Minister guides the private sector, as she guides the investors as they come in, where to invest. We shall do our best, because we all want to see happy Ugandans, have people, improve on the welfare of everybody, and once number one SDG is handled, the rest will also be handled. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the people gathered here to welcome Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, and the leader of government business in Parliament, representing His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, to come and address us. Welcome, Right Honourable.
The honorable ministers present, the head of public service and secretary to cabinet, the permanent secretaries, heads of diplomatic missions and agencies, representatives from the private sector, the media, and civil society, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to this important first National Sustainable Development Goals Conference. The implementation of SDGs is an important undertaking of the NRM government because improving the quality of lives of Ugandans has always been the driving agenda of this government. As you all know, when the 69th session of the UN General Assembly adopted the Agenda 2030, Uganda was the chair of that session. We therefore hold SDGs special in our agenda. Our leadership of the SDGs as a country is therefore unshaken. We are committed to ensuring that we deliver sustainable development to our people. As the national resistance movement, this position is consistent with the commitments we made to the people of Uganda in our NRM manifesto. In our NRM manifesto, we selected 5 priority areas, as you all know, of focus, and that include creating wealth and jobs, delivering education and health, ensuring justice and equity, protecting life and property, and achieving economic and political integration. These 5 priority areas are linked to all the SDGs. Within the government, we have also gone ahead and fully integrated the SDGs in the Uganda's National Development Plan. Currently, the National Development Plan 3 is now 90% aligned to the SDGs. We shall continue to work towards attaining all the targets set out in our National Development Plan, the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the NRM Manifesto. As a country, we have put in place the necessary institutional and policy framework to support the SDG implementation. The Office of the Prime Minister oversees the government business, including SDG implementation. We have also put in place a national roadmap for implementation of the SDGs. All these efforts are geared towards ensuring that the SDGs are fully localized and domesticated in the country. This conference, this one where we are now, is therefore a step in the right direction. It is an effort to bring together a diversity of stakeholders in SDG implementation process. The conference therefore supports the fast tracking of SDGs and creates an important policy dialogue opportunity for reviewing the progress towards the attainment of SDGs in Uganda. As mentioned in the State of National Address by His Excellency the President, and in the budget speech you all heard, Uganda has attained the lower middle income status with a GDP per capita of US dollars 1,046. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable ministers, this is slightly higher than the entrance points for the lower middle income status of US dollars 1,036. But while we can celebrate this achievement, it is also important and of course requires us to work harder and sustain the current level of GDP per capita and ensure that we impact people's livelihoods across the country. One of the areas where government is putting significant effort and investment is the Parish Development Model. Like you have already been told, the Parish Development Model is clearly aligned to SDGs principle of leave no one behind. The Parish Development Model is the government of Uganda's strategy for accelerating socio-economic transformation at grassroots across the country. Today, Parliament is being taken through the Parish Development Model and the strategies. Next week, all the ministers, together with the members of Parliament, are going to go to the fields in their respective constituencies and regions to popularize and mobilize the communities toward the Parish Development Model. The Parish Development Model, to me, is a game changer against poverty, and we must all support this idea. Colleagues, the overreaching objective of the Parish Development Model is to increase household incomes and improve the quality of life of Ugandans with a specific focus on total transformation of the subsistence households into the money economy. As we all know, it is our strategy as NRM government to eradicate poverty and of course improve vulnerability of our Ugandans. The Parish Development Model is therefore a priority program of government, particularly targeting the households which are still in subsistence economy and bring them to cash economy. I would like to request all development partners to support the implementation of the Parish Development Model. I have learned that through the regional forums, like you have also been told, which my office organized through our focal minister, the Honorable Kaswera Mumba, in the 3 regions of Uganda, that participants shared approaches and models that Ugandans are implementing to accelerate the attainment of the SDGs. We want to make sure that the ideas from the regional meetings are incorporated in our planning and implementation of SDGs. I would like to request everyone in this room that we thank the President of the Republic of Uganda. for his commitment to SDGs. The president has been the chief champion of promoting and implementing SDGs in Uganda. That is a fact. I'm happy to have listened to the useful ideas that came from our panelists. And I'm sure my team, led by the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Muhakanizi, have taken note of all of them, and we shall make sure that we follow them up to the latter. Regarding the role of the private sector in implementing SDGs, I wish to inform this audience that this morning I had a meeting with the Presidential CEOs Forum. We are already on a course, and therefore we shall together fight poverty, we shall together look for markets across the globe, we shall together do many things with the private sector. Going forward, this conference is going to be an annual event. It is going to be an annual event. We want to use this conference, or to use it as an opportunity to work closely with all our development partners to monitor the progress and share best practices in implementing the SDGs. Let me conclude by wishing you a productive 2 days, and I look forward to receiving the outcome document from this conference. With these remarks, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of the President of the Republic of Uganda, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, it is my pleasure to launch the first annual, remark that word, the first annual Sustainable Development Goals Conference for God and my country.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable Prime Minister. Another round of applause for her. She's a lady I know to stress a point, for you to be able to get it, and a very important point. When she says we will have this annually, she means that we will be able to fast track and see what our progress is and what more we can be able to do. So ladies and gentlemen, I will request that we all get back on our feet. And we will be taking the anthems, because later on after that, we will have a photo moment and we will officially be able to launch this. We have a report entirely. We'll take our photo moment, but we'll also be able to have a guest of honor who is also representing our president to tour the stalls shortly. We'll have the East African anthem and the Ugandan anthem in that order.